All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this live stream today. My name is Rachel. I am the digital marketing manager here at Bat Conservation International. So if you ever are on our social media channels and somebody's replying to you, that's probably me. And I'm super excited to be sharing some of the work and knowledge of my great colleague, Dr. Kathy Gerst. So, Kathy, whenever you're ready, why don't you tell us what we're going to talk about today?
Sure thing. Thanks, Rachel. I'm really excited to be here. My name's Kathy, and I am the Southwest Bat Hub coordinator for Bat Conservation International. So I help monitor bats throughout Arizona and New Mexico. I live in Tucson, Arizona, and I am a through and through desert rat. I'm going to share my screen right now. Start my presentation. There we go. All right, so I am going to give you a really broad overview of what it means to be an animal or a plant surviving the Southwest. So I'm going to talk for a bit today about deserts, drought, and adaptation. And so first, I'm going to just briefly talk about what makes a desert a desert. We often think of deserts as being hot, dry places. There's also cold deserts on Earth, such as Antarctica. But our deserts here in North America, shown here on this map, are pretty warm deserts. We've got 5 sort of biogeographic areas that you may or may not have heard of. We've got the Great Basin Desert up in the north, and this is a colder desert, higher elevation, a lot of sage scrub, juniper. Most of the precipitation comes during cold months. As you all probably recognize, the Joshua tree, an iconic plant living in the Mojave Desert, sort of farther down south, overlapping Arizona and California. We've got the Sonoran Desert, the beautiful desert that I live in. And this is located down into Mexico, Arizona, parts of California. We've got our Colorado Plateau, shown here, iconicized by the Grand Canyon and the Colorado River cutting through. So this is sort of our Four Corners area. And then, of course, the Chihuahuan Desert that occupies Mexico and into New Mexico. Deserts generally are areas that receive less than 10 inches of rain, actually precipitation, so it can also fall as snowfall. And one difference between these deserts is the timing of the year that the rainfall occurs in. So for example, our Great Basin Desert gets most of its rainfall in the winter as well as in the Mojave, whereas in the Sonoran Desert, we get about half of our rainfall in the winter and half in the summer from monsoons. And the Chihuahuan Desert gets most of its rainfall in the summer period. Generally, deserts also have very low humidity, and the evaporation tends to exceed how much rainfall occurs. So I'm just going to cut right to the chase because we get so many questions about this. The Southwest is getting warmer. Climate change is happening. It's happening here in the Southwest. And this map is showing you average temperatures in the Southwest region for the last 20 years compared to the long-term average. This has many consequences for ecosystems, including increases in wildfires and the spread of invasive species. And this harsher climate can have consequences for many of our plants and animals in the desert. So what about water? And what do we mean when we talk about drought? Well, drought can be defined as a prolonged period of abnormally low rainfall, leading to a shortage of water on the landscape, as well as in the water table and in our rivers and streams. Scientists have created indices for drought, so we can look at patterns of drought across time and space. And what this graph is showing is that over the past 20 years, most of the land in the Southwest is in some stage of drought most of the time. We do get some respites, as you can see here in these little places where we're seeing dips, but not enough to pull us out of a long-term pattern of widespread drought. As I mentioned before, scientists have come up with a drought index, not so different from our economic indices that we have, by combining data on precipitation and evapotranspiration on the landscape. And so what we can do is look at long-term patterns and see that over the last 100+ years or so, we have found that there's more severe droughts happening in the last 20 years than in that historical record. And this trend is sort of ongoing in that downward pattern of drought severity. So that's a little bit worrisome, right? But the one thing I want to emphasize here and for the rest of my talk is that variability in temperature and rainfall in desert ecosystems is a normal part of these environments. And the plants and animals that are found in the desert are adapted to living through harsh conditions and periods of scarcity. We can see large variation between years and within a year of precipitation in desert ecosystems. And deserts are very resilient to these cycles, although they are trending towards more dry conditions generally, which puts a lot of stress on the system. Both these photos are showing different times of year and locations, but not that far from each other in Death Valley. But what I want to share is that once water is available in the desert, our plants and animals are able to quickly take advantage of it and survive and even thrive, as you can see here from this magnificent wildflower display. And so what I'll be talking about for the rest of the talk is how do animals and plants survive and thrive given these variable patterns and changing conditions. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears now and discuss the adaptations that our plants and animals in the desert have. I'll focus mainly on animals for this talk, since I know many of you are coming from a bat-loving audience. But as a recovering plant biologist, I do want to share a bit about the ways in which plants in the desert can survive drought conditions. So one mechanism is succulents. So succulents allows plants to store water to get through periods of drought, just like these cacti pictured here in the top corner. Other plants tolerate drought through their physiology, behavior, and morphology, such as creosote bushes, which have thick, waxy, small leaves, which reduces water loss, and Palo Verde trees pictured here at the bottom, which also has very small leaves to reduce water loss, but very impressively are able to do about 70% of their photosynthesis through their bark, and that's why they're have green bark and got their name, Palo Verde. Finally, many plants in the desert avoid drought by being only active during the rainy season. And this is how we get our spectacular spring annual wildflower displays that many people are very fond of. They don't happen every year, and they certainly only happen for a short period of time. But these species lay low most of the time as dormant seeds in the seed bank. So some of these desert annual seeds can be dormant for up to 20 or more years, waiting for just the right condition to germinate and grow and flower when a great year of moisture presents itself. So now we're going to go on to animals, and specifically I just want to talk about bats for a moment. In the US, the Southwest has the highest diversity of bats, upward of 30 species. And one way that bats can survive harsh conditions is just simply by the way they live, their life history. They're active in the evenings and forage at night instead of during the day is just a major adaptation to climate, which allows them to avoid the hottest temperatures. Another way that's really, whoops, I'm sorry about that. Another way that's really critical is through movement. Many bats forage over long distances to find food and water, and they migrate to different climates when they need to via seasonal movements. And so this is really big. Finally, there's studies that have shown that bats in the desert have adaptations to reduce water loss compared to bats that live in less arid climates. By adjusting the lipid composition of their skin. So they have the ability to lose less water through their skin. Pictured here are some of our bats, like the Mexican free-tailed bat and the Mexican long-tongued bat. one of our nectar feeders, which both migrate from Mexico following resources and food availability. Whereas other desert species like this pallid bat that likes to eat a lot of our charismatic desert fauna like scorpions and centipedes don't migrate, but rather seek out various locations within a smaller region throughout the year. With increased climate change, the suitable habitat for arid adapted bats is expected to decrease, and those that can't move as far distances for forage and food and water are at the most risk. So just something to keep in mind. Now I'm going to talk more broadly about adaptations that allow animals to persist and thrive in the desert. One of these is burrowing and finding microclimates. So again, life history, moving to where it's cooler. This is an avoidance strategy, much like those desert wildflowers, to seek out a cooler spot to live during those hot periods of the day or hot periods of the year. So we've got some of my favorite species here, the Gila monster lizards. These only come out for a few weeks a year, otherwise are down in the cooler ground, as well as desert tortoises. Ground squirrels spend a lot of time down on the ground, but are up and about much of the year. So they're moving around more during a day. We've got pack rats down here in the bottom middle, which are so amazing because they create their own microclimate and their own habitat that's cooler to live. And some of these pack rat middens are just amazing. They've been around since the Pleistocene. You can go back and see what the climate was like by the plants and seeds and materials that the pack rats were collecting to form their dens, their middens, hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands of years ago. Even birds will burrow in the ground. We've got great little burrowing owls that are so great. And finally, bats like this canyon bat pictured here. There's two of them, very cute. They're often found in small rock crevices. So a lot of bats do this as well. They find cooler microclimates to either spend their summertime or their winter as well when they're less active. But all of these techniques give them sort of access to more consistent and cooler temperatures. Another adaptation that animals in the desert use is to have features that allow them to conduct heat differently throughout the year and the day. So this curve-billed thrasher bird right here will smooth down their feathers to create an insulating layer so they lose less heat that way. Coyotes, much like maybe your dogs, if you have shedding dogs like huskies or German shepherds, they will adjust the thickness of their coat throughout the year depending on their temperature. Very iconic, the jackrabbit ears are excellent for dissipating heat. And one of my favorite desert adaptations is the roadrunner. These guys have highly pigmented skin, and they sort of adjust their position and their feathers throughout the day in orientation to absorb heat or to avoid heat by, putting their skin out in the morning and heating up that way, and then adjusting the position of their feathers to cool down. They also have really neat glands below their eyes where they can excrete salt when they are not able to access as much freestanding water. And so they're getting more of their water and concentrating it more through food. So this really helps them in those periods of drought. Finally, many animals use evaporative cooling and have the ability to protect their water balance in high heat conditions and when there's low water availability. Animals like bobcats or mountain lions, as well as our coyotes and a lot of our other mammals in the desert pant to cool down, just like your cats and dogs at home. Kangaroo rats are really amazing. They have the ability to get all their metabolic water they need from just the seeds they eat. And so they don't need to actually drink water at all. Owls, included in other birds as well, like this barn owl, use a technique called gular fluttering, where they circulate air over a buccal and gular membrane and sac to cool down. And so they have their own little air conditioning system in them. And vultures are just so great. They get such a bad rap, but they do all sorts of crazy things. They actually urinate on their legs to cool down as one way. So they have their own little evaporative cooling system. And of course, their bald head allows them to release heat through their head. And so I'm going to start wrapping this up, but I want to make sure that we have some take-home messages. And of course, I'm going to be here to answer your questions and have a discussion. And what I hope you take home from this is that despite ongoing drought conditions in the Southwest, our animals and plants have mechanisms to be resilient, but they need our help. We expect that some species will suffer if these trends continue, which they are predicted to do. But there are things that we can do to help make our ecosystems and our communities and our animals' habitat more resilient to climate variability and climate trends towards heat and aridity. For example, you can support efforts to conserve water, both from human usage, but also conservation measures that protect our incredible desert waterways. Our streams, our wetlands, our seeps, our springs, they're there. They're really critically important for animals in the desert. You can also take steps to provide wildlife-friendly habitat at your home or in your communities, at your schools, at your library. There's great programs like Tucson Audubon has a Habitat for Home program where you can garden in such a way that supports wildlife, including the insects and pollinators that are needed to support all these other animals as well. And BCI is currently starting to initiate more efforts to provide resources for bat-friendly gardening as well. And finally, I urge you to support wildlife-friendly infrastructure and movement corridors for wildlife. A lot of our human-built environment can actually help support animals by providing them safe passageways to migrate, or as pictured here in the bridge in my community, we have special ways that we can make bridges to be hospitable for bats. So I'm going to wrap this up and just say thank you so much to come to this webinar, this Facebook Live event. Thank you to Rachel for reaching out to me and giving me this opportunity. I'm going to be happy to take questions. And I just want to show that this map here, this photo is just showing you how incredible this region that I live in. These are these green spots are the Sky Island. These are large mountain ranges that are rising up from a sea of desert. And these mountains and forests are refuges for plants and animals in this sea of desert, as well as all of our waterways. And so it's really important to me to protect these communities. And that's it. I'll pass it on to Rachel.
Yeah, wow, that was so much information. I know I learned a lot of new terms that I had no idea that I'm probably going to ask you later how to spell. But yeah, I do want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them. Also, if you're watching this later or you decide you have a question later, you can put those questions either in the Facebook chat. That's where you can watch this later. We'll also be posting it on our YouTube channel. So if you're interested in rewatching, you can go Google Bat Conservation International YouTube or Facebook and you can find it there. And I do also want to point out that I put in the chat our guide to gardening for bats. This is a new guide that we just published on our website a couple months ago. And even though it's now fall, this is a great thing if you're planning your garden early for next year, or if you want to keep it in mind for spring, is that there's a lot of opportunities to really support all wildlife, including bats, in your own backyard or your own community. So that's a great resource. And we're always happy to answer questions about that. I do know that, Kathy, it looks like you're going to be getting an email from Stephanie, who has some very intricate questions for you.
Okay.
And so she kind of had a couple. I'm going to let her email you. So Stephanie, if you have any trouble getting a hold of Kathy, please just send us a direct message on social media. And Stephanie, Kathy's email was on that last slide, and I'll put it here in the chat as well so that you have it. she's like, how do I get a hold of her?
Okay, Stephanie,
Cool.
I can't wait to hear from you.
So yeah, and everybody on Facebook is just saying thank you so much. So Kathy, I really do want to thank you for doing this. I think it's so important that we bring your expertise to everybody, all of our fans in the digital space, and hopefully we'll have you back again. So with that, I'm going to say thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.